Welcome to Creative Conflict Resolution Methods, a practical and engaging approach to help Generation Z deal with everyday tensions, disagreements, and emotional challenges. In this session, we'll explore how conflict can become a source of growth, and how games, storytelling, and interaction can turn learning into transformation. Let's start by asking a simple question. Why don't traditional conflict resolution methods work for Generation Z? The answer is, they're out of touch. Most old-school methods involve lectures, note-taking, and step-by-step instructions. But Gen Z is different. They've grown up with smartphones, social media, and interactive content. They expect learning to be hands-on, fast, and meaningful. Traditional models also focus only on solutions, ignoring the feelings and emotional process behind conflicts. Gen Z wants to explore why conflicts happen, not just how to fix them. And most importantly, traditional methods forget about digital conflicts, cyberbullying, group chat arguments, online misunderstandings. For Gen Z, these are just as real as face-to-face issues. Finally, young people today value fairness, inclusion, and collaboration. If learning feels top-down or fake, they check out. That's why we need a new approach. So, what works better for Generation Z? Games. Interactive challenges. Shared experiences. Game-based learning helps young people practice handling conflict in realistic but safe ways. They get to feel the pressure, test strategies, and reflect on what works, all while having fun. Instead of sitting in a lecture, they're moving, collaborating, and solving problems together. They practice how to stay calm, how to listen, and how to speak up with respect. Games also make room for trial and error. If they make mistakes, it's not a failure, it's part of the learning process. Most importantly, games match how Gen Z learns naturally, through action, teamwork, and emotions, not just theory. This approach turns conflict resolution from a lesson into a real-life skill. Let's dive into the 6 main tools used in game-based conflict resolution. These tools aren't just about playing games for fun. They're carefully designed to build practical skills, like emotional intelligence, problem-solving, negotiation, and teamwork. Here's how each tool works. First, role plays. This is one of the most powerful ways to practice conflict resolution. Participants act out real-life scenarios, like a fight between friends, an argument in a group project, or a disagreement over social media. One person plays one side, another plays the other, and sometimes a third person acts as a mediator. Why is this so effective? Because when you step into a role, you feel the situation. You're not just thinking about what you would say, you're actually saying it. You experience the emotions, the tension, and the need to find a solution in real time. Role plays help young people practice empathy. They get to see the world from someone else's point of view. Sometimes, they even switch roles midway, to understand both sides of a conflict. They also practice active listening, which is one of the most important conflict resolution skills. When you really listen, instead of thinking about what you'll say next, you create space for understanding. Next, board games. These are structured games that involve strategy, teamwork, and sometimes competition. In a well-designed board game for conflict resolution, players might have to make tough decisions together, handle limited resources, or resolve challenges as a group. Board games teach players how to cooperate under pressure, how to negotiate, and how to deal with frustration. They're also a great way to introduce concepts like fairness, compromise, and shared responsibility in a low-stakes environment. Digital games are also powerful tools. For Gen Z, the online world is real life. Conflicts don't just happen face-to-face, they happen in DMs, in group chats, on gaming platforms, and in comment sections. Digital simulations and role-play games can mirror these situations. They let young people explore conflict online without real-world consequences. In a game, they can test different responses, see how their actions affect others, and reflect on the outcomes. Digital games also allow for self-paced learning, so participants can practice again and again until they build confidence. Storytelling is another essential tool. When people share personal stories about conflict, times they were hurt, misunderstood, or had to forgive, they build emotional connections with others. Listening to different stories creates empathy, understanding, and sometimes healing. Storytelling games might involve sharing real experiences, creating fictional conflict stories, or imagining how historical or social conflicts could have been handled differently. This process helps participants explore different perspectives, practice expressing emotions, and build deeper group trust. Escape rooms are a high-energy way to build cooperation. In these games, participants are locked in a scenario and must solve puzzles together to escape before time runs out. These games build collaboration under pressure. Players learn to share information, manage stress, and find creative solutions as a team. They experience what it feels like to depend on each other and communicate effectively in tense situations. Finally, empathy cards are tools for reflection. These cards contain prompts or questions designed to help participants talk about their feelings, values, and experiences. For example, tell about a time you had a misunderstanding with someone. What's something people assume about you that isn't true? How do you usually react when you're upset? Empathy cards create space for honest, non-judgmental conversation. They build emotional literacy, the ability to recognize, name, and talk about feelings, which is at the heart of peaceful conflict resolution. Together, these 6 tools form a complete learning system. They give young people opportunities to practice conflict skills in different ways, through acting, playing, reflecting, and collaborating. That's what makes game-based learning so powerful. It's not about memorizing rules, it's about living the lessons. Why do games work so well for Generation Z? Because this generation learns differently. They've grown up in a world where learning happens through interaction, experience, and participation, not just lectures or textbooks. Let's break down the reasons. First, Gen Z is the first fully digital generation. They're used to swiping, tapping, creating, and collaborating online. They expect learning to be interactive and fast-paced. When you give them long lectures or one-way lessons, they disconnect. But when you let them take part, make decisions, solve problems, try new things, they engage fully. They learn better because they're involved. Games naturally create that interactive learning space. Second, games help manage emotional learning. Conflict isn't just about logic or finding solutions, it's about emotions. Games allow young people to feel the emotions of conflict, frustration, disappointment, relief, excitement, while staying in a safe environment. They might experience the stress of a deadline in an escape room, or the tension of negotiating with friends in a role play, or the satisfaction of solving a group problem together in a board game. When emotions are part of the learning process, the lessons stick. People remember what they feel, not just what they hear. Third, games teach teamwork and empathy naturally. In a game, players have to collaborate. They depend on each other. They communicate, compromise, and sometimes disagree. Through these experiences, they learn to see the world from other people's perspectives. They understand the importance of listening, patience, and respect. For Gen Z, these skills are more important than ever. They're growing up in a complex, multicultural, and often divided world. Learning how to work with different people is a survival skill, not just a nice extra. Fourth, games create a risk-free practice zone. In real life, conflicts come with consequences, hurt feelings, damaged relationships, or even danger. That makes it scary to try new approaches. Games remove that risk. Participants can experiment with conflict styles, try out messages, practice negotiation, or handle difficult conversations, all without real-world damage. If they make a mistake, no one gets hurt. Instead, they get to reflect, reset, and try again. This builds confidence. Over time, players stop fearing conflict because they've practiced handling it safely. Fifth, games mirror real-life situations. Think about the kinds of conflicts Gen Z faces. Group project stress at school. Online bullying or cyberdrama. Misunderstandings with friends. family disagreements over responsibilities, feeling excluded from social groups. Games allow young people to act out these scenarios, explore their feelings, and develop real strategies for dealing with them. They aren't just learning theory, they're preparing for real moments in their everyday lives. Finally, games are fun, and fun matters. When learning is fun, it's more engaging. It lowers stress, builds trust in the group, and makes people more open to new ideas. But this isn't just about entertainment. It's about creating emotional safety. When young people are relaxed and enjoying themselves, they're more likely to be honest, take risks, and reflect deeply. So why do games work? Because they match the way Gen Z learns. They're active, emotional, social, and real. They turn conflict learning into something young people can actually use, not just memorize. Let's talk about how conflicts escalate, what we call the tornado of conflict. It starts small. Maybe someone forgets to text back, interrupts you, or leaves you out of a plan. That's the trigger. Then things get bigger. People bring up old problems. You always do this. Or, this happened last week too. Next, people form alliances. They pull in friends or family to take sides, and the conflict starts to grow beyond the original issue. At this point, people stop listening. Instead of hearing each other out, they focus only on defending themselves or proving they're right. Then the conflict moves into extreme positions. Each side thinks they're 100% right, and the other is completely wrong. Compromise feels impossible. Finally, people start trying to hurt each other emotionally, through gossip, insults, or shutting down communication altogether. Understanding this pattern helps young people recognize conflict escalation early, so they can stop the spiral before it gets out of control. When conflict happens, people respond in different ways. Some reactions are automatic. Others are learned over time. Let's break down the 5 main conflict management styles. First is avoidance. This is when someone walks away from the problem or pretends it isn't happening. Sometimes this is smart, like if the issue is small or you need time to cool down. But if you always avoid conflict, problems build up. Resentment grows. Misunderstandings pile on. Avoidance works in the short term, but often creates bigger issues later. Second is accommodation. Accommodation means giving in to keep the peace. Maybe you don't speak up because you don't want to cause drama. Or you let someone else get their way just to avoid tension. Sometimes this is kind and generous. But if you always accommodate, you might feel invisible or unimportant. Over time, this can lead to frustration or burnout. Third is competition. Competition happens when people try to win at all costs. This might work in sports, but in relationships, it can cause damage. When you only focus on winning, you might ignore other people's feelings or needs. You might interrupt, argue aggressively, or refuse to compromise. Sometimes, competition is necessary, like in situations where safety is involved or serious injustice needs to be stopped. But most of the time, this approach breaks trust. Fourth is compromise. Compromise is about meeting halfway. Each side gives something up to find a middle ground. For example, if 2 friends want to pick a restaurant, and each chooses a different place, they might agree on a third option that's okay for both. Compromise is fair, but sometimes no one gets exactly what they want. It's a balance, but it can leave people feeling only partly satisfied. Fifth is collaboration. Collaboration is often the best choice for long-term solutions. It means finding an outcome where everyone's needs are met. Instead of fighting over who's right, collaborators ask, "What do you really need? What do I really need? How can we find a way that works for both of us?" This approach requires time, patience, and trust. But it builds stronger relationships because no one feels ignored or defeated. So, what's the takeaway? Each conflict style has its place. Avoidance works when you need to pause and cool down. Accommodation is okay when the issue is small or not worth a fight. Competition might be necessary in emergencies. Compromise is good when time is short. Collaboration is best when relationships matter and long-term solutions are needed. Games help young people try out these different strategies safely. They can experiment, reflect on what works, and build the confidence to choose the right approach in real life. One of the simplest but most powerful tools for peaceful conflict resolution is the I message. When we're upset, it's easy to start with blame. You never listen. You're always late. But this makes people defensive and often escalates the conflict. I messages help shift the focus from blaming the other person to expressing how you feel. Here's how it works. I feel. Say your emotion. When. Explain what happened. Because. Share why it matters. I would like. Suggest a solution. For example, I feel frustrated when meetings start late because it makes me anxious about deadlines. I'd like us to agree on starting on time. Games and role-plays help young people practice this skill, making it easier to use in real life. Here's a classic example from negotiation training called the orange problem. Two people argue because they both want the same orange. At first, it seems like they have to split it in half or fight over it. But when they talk, they discover something interesting. Anna needs the peel to make medicine. Georgie needs the juice to bake a cake. Once they understand each other's real needs, they realize they can both get what they want. This is the difference between positions and interests. A position is what you say you want. I want the orange. An interest is why you want it, the peel, the juice, the reason behind the need. Games like this teach young people to ask deeper questions, listen carefully, and look for solutions that work for everyone, not just themselves. Have you ever seen an optical illusion where some people see an old woman and others see a young woman? Or a picture that looks like two faces but also like a vase? That's called subjectivity of perception, the idea that people see the same situation in completely different ways. This happens in conflict all the time. Maybe you think someone is ignoring you, but from their perspective, they're just busy or distracted. Maybe you feel excluded from a group, but the others think you're the one who pulled away first. Both sides believe they're right because they're seeing the situation from their own angle. This doesn't mean anyone is lying or being difficult. It just means that reality feels different depending on where you're standing. When we teach conflict resolution, one of the most important lessons is there isn't just one truth in a conflict. There are usually multiple perspectives. Games help young people experience this directly. When they act out both sides of a role play, or when they listen to each other's stories in empathy exercises, they start to understand how easy it is to misinterpret actions or words. Once you realize that people can see the same situation differently, you stop trying to win at the argument. Instead, you start trying to understand the other person's point of view. Another essential skill in conflict resolution is emotional literacy, the ability to recognize, name, and talk about your feelings. We often think conflict is about facts. But most of the time, it's really about feelings. Maybe you're not just annoyed, you're actually feeling disrespected. Maybe you're not just angry, you're also hurt or afraid. If you can't name your feelings, they control you. But when you can say, I'm feeling rejected, or I'm scared of being left out, the emotions lose some of their power. That's why psychologists say, name it to tame it. Once you identify your emotions, you can choose how to act instead of reacting automatically. Games and activities help young people build emotional literacy. For example, in some games, players pause after a conflict moment and say out loud, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? What do I need? This turns emotional chaos into emotional clarity. And it helps players respond with calm and respect, even when things get tense. Learning to talk about emotions makes all conflict conversations easier. It creates honesty, connection, and trust. Why do so many people fear conflict? Because they feel unprepared. They worry about saying the wrong thing, losing friends, or being misunderstood. So they avoid conflict altogether, or they explode in anger when things get too big to hold in. But like any other life skill, conflict resolution gets easier with practice. Think about learning to swim. You don't just jump in the ocean on your first try. You practice in shallow water. You get used to the feeling. You build your skills. Conflict is the same. The more you practice in safe situations, like role plays, games, and simulations, the more confident you become when real conflicts happen. You've already experienced the feelings, the choices, and the conversations in a safe space. So when it happens in real life, you're ready. That's why game-based learning works. It gives you practice rounds before the real test. The goal isn't to avoid all conflict. It's to handle conflict better when it comes. Most people think of conflict as something bad, something to avoid. But conflict isn't always a problem. In fact, it can actually make relationships stronger if it's handled the right way. When you face a conflict with honesty, calm, and respect, you show the other person that your relationship is strong enough to handle differences. You also build trust. Think about it: if you can disagree with someone, talk it through, and still stay friends afterward, that's real connection. Conflict can lead to better understanding. You might learn what's important to the other person. They might learn something new about you. Together, you find solutions that work for both of you. That's what we call transforming conflict into connection. In game-based learning, young people get to experience this again and again. They have conflicts in the game, work through them, and come out feeling closer, not further apart. They learn that the goal isn't to win. The goal is to understand, connect, and grow. When conflict is seen this way, it stops being scary. It becomes an opportunity. Before we finish, let's reflect. Conflict is part of every human life. It's normal. It's natural. But how we respond to conflict, that's a choice. And that choice can change relationships, communities, and even the world. Today, we've learned that conflict resolution isn't about winning arguments or avoiding problems. It's about building connection, understanding, and respect. Games help us practice these skills in safe, creative ways. They allow us to try, fail, learn, and try again, without judgment. So, what's next? Keep practicing. Use the tools you've learned. Messages. Empathy. Listening. Negotiation. Collaboration. Notice the tornado moments and stop them early. Turn arguments into conversations. Ask, what do you need? And share your needs too. Most of all, remember, peace isn't a feeling. It's a skill. And like any skill, it grows stronger the more you practice. Thank you for joining this journey. Let's keep building a world where conflict is not something to fear, but something to learn from.